Where does English come from? That might not be a question that most people ask themselves, and when they do, they sometimes come up with the wrong answer. I have heard a lot of times that English is a Romantic language, meaning a language coming from the Romans, a language descended from Latin. And we get that idea because a lot of our big words, a lot of our fancy words come from French, and many of those words in turn come from Latin. However, that only makes up about 30% of our words. 10% of our words come from various random sources like Sanskrit. But the remainder, the other 60%, after you account for the Romance words, the Latin words, the Sanskrit, Greek, whatever, most of them come from Germanic. Germanic meaning the family of languages that German is a part of. So, a long time ago, England was ruled over by a people called the Celts. The Celts were a tribal people who were later conquered by Julius Caesar and incorporated into Roman culture, but eventually after the fall of Rome, a group of people called the Anglo-Saxons invaded from what is now modern Holland, or the Netherlands, if you want to use the technical term, and took over the British Isles. They spoke a language that is closely related to modern Dutch. Probably the closest language to what they spoke, other than, of course, modern English, would be a language called Frisian. And that leads to the next question. What was this language like? I just told you it was like Dutch, but what does that mean? A lot of people, when they use the term Old English, are referring to Shakespearean English. Shakespearean English, very beautiful way of speaking, feels really old. They said things like, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo? And I am no pilot, but wert thou as far as the furthest shore washed by the furthest sea, I should venture for such merchandise, and to be or not to be, that is the question." Whether or not the average person actually spoke like that is a topic for another time. That was really more poetic speech. But they did use a lot of words like wherefore, thou, and thee in a lot of places where we would use the word you. So it is older, and it is different, but that was the style of English spoken just a couple hundred years ago. What we're talking about is the English that was spoken over 1,000 years ago, over a full millennium ago. And it was very different. It had something called cases, for instance. A case is where a noun, meaning a person, place, or thing, changes its form to reflect what it does in a sentence rather than rely simply on word order and prepositions like modern English does. For instance, to take a kind of simple sentence, but also kind of a weird sentence, I gave a ship to a ship. Not something you're going to do in real life. The word ship appears identically in both places. What tells you which ship is being given and which ship is receiving another ship is simply word order and the words that come between them. However, if we just take ship to a ship, just that part, in Old English, they actually still had the word ship, still pronounced the same, but that section, ship to a ship, would be ship shippe. And the shippe means to the ship. If I wanted to say a ship's X, that would be shippes, which, interestingly enough, is a case that we actually still have in English. We write it as apostrophe S, but it's actually a case. It comes from noun declension, this habit of changing the way you say a word and spell it to reflect what it's doing in a sentence. They also had a lot more verb conjugation, meaning you changed the form of a verb to reflect who was doing it. For instance, the word begin comes from the Old English word beginnen. And so if you wanted to say, I am beginning, that's each, that's the word for I was each beginne. If I wanted to say, you are beginning, that would usually be du beginnest. But that's only for singular you. If I wanted to go up to a group of people and said, you all are beginning, I would say, ye beginnen. And the whole language worked like this. We changed nouns and verbs to express what they were doing. And Shakespearean English did that second part. They had dropped the noun thing by then, but they did change verbs to express what they were doing a lot of the time, more than we do. But if somebody from Shakespeare's time were to read something from 950 AD, when the Anglo-Saxon period was at its height in England, they wouldn't understand what they were saying. This is from the preface to the book of Genesis, written by a man named Alfric. Alfric was the man who translated the book of Genesis into Old English. Here's my attempt at the sentence. It says, Alfric munuk gret Aethelwerd eldorman edmodliche. Thu bada me lof that each shoulda the awenden of ladna on English the book Genesis. Can you guess what that said? You probably got the book Genesis and not much else. It's Alfred the monk greeting Aethelwerd the Lord humbly. Thou bade me, dear sir, that I should convert from Latin to English the book of Genesis. Why am I sharing any of this with any of you? It's to impress on you that there's a lot to learn about your own languages, be that English. A lot of the people who watch these videos are Russian, so that might be Russian. That might be whatever. That might be Hebrew, Swahili. Whatever it is, there's probably a lot to learn about your language that you may not know. There's a lot of benefit to learning foreign languages. It's what I do all the time, just constantly. But there's also a lot of benefit to learning the history of your language. To understand where it came from, you can begin to see things that maybe don't make a lot of sense to you now start to make sense. An example of that was the word fire. I never got why when we sever somebody's employment, we say, I'm firing you. We're not lighting them on fire. There's no burning fuel involved anywhere in that. But in Old English, the word was firion, which came from the word far. The suffix "yon" shifted the pronunciation of far into fear, And over time, that again morphed to fire. And that's where that comes from. It makes sense now. To fire somebody isn't to set them ablaze. It means to put them far away from you. And there's a lot more to learn. There's a lot more to learn about English, and there's a lot more to learn about whatever your native language is. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you like and subscribe. Have a wonderful night. Bye.